meeting Audit Committee Chairman's notes. If we're ready to start, we can start now. So first, I'd like to welcome everybody to the first virtual meeting of the Audit Committee. Clearly, this has proved to be a little bit challenging making it come together today for various reasons, but never mind. We're caught. Before we move to the formal agenda, there are a few procedural housekeeping issues to deal with. This meeting is being held under the virtual meetings regulations using Microsoft Teams. Decisions made by the committee will have the same standing and validity as if they'd been made at a physical meeting held at the town hall. We are streaming today's meeting live on the internet, and a recorded version will be available to view within 48 hours on the North Somerset Council website. I would refer councillors to the meeting etiquette and guide using Teams as previously circulated. Please remember to use your headphones, as this will improve sound quality for everyone. Members and all, please will you ensure that your audio is muted when you are not speaking and that your camera is turned off when you are speaking, and if you have the facility, can you please ensure your video is turned on? As it happens, you're responsible for taking that action, I believe. If you do not turn your video on during speaking, I will remind you to do so, providing, of course, that I'm able to notice that. And Hazel, perhaps you can monitor that as well, or Sue. When you wish to speak, would you please indicate this by using the chat function rather than the hand signals function? It's easier to monitor requests to speak from a single source. I will invite each of you to speak by way of a queue system. Please do not use the chat function for anything other than requests to speak and official council business. If you're leaving the meeting or returning to the meeting, would you please ensure that I'm aware of this by using the chat function? This is paramount in respect of disclosable pecuniary interests, where you are not permitted to participate in the agenda item by law. You should immediately leave the meeting before the start of any debate on an item where you have a disclosable pecuniary interest. A Democratic Services officer will confirm when you've left the meeting or rejoin the meeting following determination of the agenda item. Voting. When proposing a motion, would you please indicate via the chat function that you wish to speak and wait until I invite you to do so. Please then clearly state what you are moving, for example, the recommendation in the report. If you're seconding a motion, please again clearly indicate you wish to speak via the chat function and wait for me to call you. At this meeting, voting will be by roll call. The clerk will call each councillor in turn by name in alphabetical order. Please state clearly if your vote is for or against the motion or abstain. Please remember to turn on your microphone when voting and mute when you have spoken. If you have not heard the full debate on the item, please state so and your vote will be marked abstain. This will ensure the vote is accurately recorded and will enable members of the public to properly observe the vote. At the Chairman's discretion, voting on procedural matters will be done in reverse order and en bloc. That is, the Chairman will ask for votes against the motion first, then abstentions, then all other members in the meeting will be taken en bloc as voting for the motion. Before I move to the agenda, are there any questions from councillors? I'll take that as a no.
No one has indicated, Chairman, via the chat function.
Thank you. Can all members see and hear today's proceedings? Please indicate.
Not having the chat function, I can on the phone and TV.
Thank you, Sandra.
And Chairman, Councillor Richardson's confirmed yes, he can.
Thank you very much. So please ensure all mobiles are switched off. I'm now going to do that on mine, so I won't be able to receive any messages from anybody. For the benefit of those in the meeting and members of the press and public who may be watching via YouTube, we will undertake a roll call of all councillors to confirm attendance. The committee clerk will now undertake the roll call.
Hazel here, the Democratic Services Officer. So Councillor Cato, the Chairman.
Present.
Councillor Hearn.
Present on the phone.
Councillor Pepperell. Not present. Councillor Richardson, Vice Chairman.
Present.
Councillor Weston. Not present.
Okay, I will then move on to the formal agenda, and we'll hope that Councillor Westwood will actually be able to attend when he gets a line in. The first item on the agenda then is addresses by members of the public. Are there any members of the public present? Are there any addresses by the members of the public?
No, Chairman. No members of the public present.
Richard
and no
Westwood
addresses.
Is now joining.
Apologies for absence.
Chairman, sorry, just to interject, I'm not sure if you heard that, but that was just to say that Councillor Westwood is now joining the meeting on the phone.
That's excellent, thank you.
No apologies for absence, Chairman.
I'm going to offer a possible apology for absence for Councillor Pepperell, because I know she is trying to do it. Anyway, I don't know what the rules are on that. Declaration of disclosable pecuniary interests. Are there any? I'll take that as a no.
None have been
No,
indicated, Chairman.
Okay, so the first agenda item proper is the minutes of the meeting held on the 30th of January. And the agenda item is to approve as a correct record. Can I invite comments on that, please?
Chairman, I have Councillor Richardson who'd like to speak.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. It's really more of a comment than a question. Under, if I'm going to find it, I assume it's all AUD 21 resolved that the external auditor email a link to the websites referenced in the report to Democratic Services for circulation to the Audit Committee. I don't recollect receiving that, so hopefully we can contact them and ask them to do that. There's lots of interesting papers which would be of use to us.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that, Jeff.
That's all.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have any comments or observations to make on the last minutes?
No one has indicated via the chat function, Chairman, but of course you've got two callers, two members who are in on the telephone, so
yeah,
they won't be able to indicate.
They won't be able to indicate that way. So, Sandra, do you have any observations to make?
No, not on the minutes.
And Rich?
No, John.
Okay, that's fine. So in that case, can we approve the minutes as a correct record? I move that we do. Can I have a seconder?
Second.
Thank you. All in agreement?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, that's so approved then. Matters referred by Council, the Executive and other committees. Are there any?
No, Chairman, I'm not aware of any.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Hazel. So the next agenda item then is agenda item 6, emergency governance and decision-making arrangements. This is a report by the Head of Legal and Democratic Services, which has been attached to us. So may we start with that, please?
Thank you. It's Nick Brain, Head of Legal and Democratic Services. As you say, you have the report with your agenda papers, Chairman. And as members who were able to attend the last executive virtual meeting, you'll recall that we put up there the list of items that were taken under delegated powers. That was supplementing a almost weekly announcement at one stage to all members from the Chief Executive and the Director of D&E, indicating the actions they had taken. But then we brought the formal report as required by the Constitution to the last executive. So that is available for members of this committee. I have to say that in my view, the arrangements worked very well. I think we went beyond what is actually required in the Constitution, and even some decisions that would normally have been taken by directors as business as usual, they were being documented just to make sure we had a proper audit trail and information as to why decisions were taken at what points and for what reasons. So I think that worked very well from my point of view as your monitoring officer, and obviously I welcome any views from the committee, but that was done. Moving forward to where we are now, we're doing this likewise with the relaxations and the easements as government undoes the lockdown. We're likewise taking those sorts of decisions and documenting more formally than perhaps would be the normal business as usual, the reasons for why decisions have been taken, what is being opened and why, and the risks that might be inherent in that and the mitigating factors that are being taken into account. So that continues as business as normal at the moment. And then for the future, as indicated in the paper, we have already proposed some changes to the way that scrutiny and the policy and scrutiny panels getting involved, both in scrutinising matters, but also in the policy development, making changes to the forward plan for the council and to the forward plan for CLT and the executive, so that we can bring more early to scrutiny panel chairman what is being put forward on forward plans, and making sure that all officers and members trying to bring forward things through the committee systems are forced to look at what engagement might be useful with it, scrutiny, and make proposals. Those would then go forward to the scrutiny panel chairman and vice chairman, so that they can say, yes, we like that proposal, or no, we don't think we have a need to look at that at this moment, or we'd like more emphasis on that, or we'd like to approach it in a different manner. So we're starting to engage with that. That has gone down well with the chairman of the panels, and I think we're implementing that as we speak, with the view then that those will then be drawn together into an overarching forward plan work programme for all of the policy and scrutiny panels, so that we can start to look forward maybe a longer period and focus on what might be coming forward this year, what might be coming forward next year. And when the policy and scrutiny panels really need to engage with things like contract awards and contracts that would be let, those sort of further off things, they can decide at what time would it be appropriate for them to engage. So the details of that are in the report for you, Chairman. Happy to take any questions, and also happy to take any comments from members of your committee that we could then feed back into that process and make further recommendations as to how we might modify those working arrangements as we go forward.
Thank you for that. Appreciate that. So can I invite any questions or comments or observations, please?
Chairman, Councillor Richardson has indicated he'd like to speak.
Thank you.
Chairman. Thanks, Nick. I just got a few points on the report. Under 3.3, it says to take emergency action on behalf of the council on any matter in cases of emergency, etc. With wherever possible prior consultation with the Chief Executive Director of Corporate Services, the Executive Member and the Chairman of the appropriate Policy and Scrutiny Panel. Has that happened? Has the appropriate chair of the Policy and Scrutiny Panel been consulted?
Yes, Councillor, in all cases that is the requirement, that the necessary officers are consulted and the appropriate chairman of the Policy and Scrutiny Panel. The rationale behind that being that obviously if the chairman, if the panel wanted to then call in a matter, that's the notice given to the chairman, so that the chairman of the relevant panel can make their members of that panel aware that emergency action is being taken, because this calling process is still available even during periods of emergency. So yes, that has happened with all of those reports.
Okay, so has there been an example where the chair of HOSP has been asked or consulted?
I'm not sure that there were any HOSP reports, any items that would fall within the purview of HOSP. Of the formal ones that went through, I think most were COCO, and a few of the children's ones, obviously with the children's services and so on. Okay, I was just slightly amused by that, given that we're talking about an outbreak of virus, which would be public health. I'd have thought all over it, but fair enough. Under 3.5, I just want to, and I know I've discussed this with you before, but basically I want to be absolutely sure with the new ways that the scrutiny panels and policy and scrutiny panels are working, that we have a distinction between policy and scrutiny. And I know we've discussed this, so I won't labour that point. I was just wondering, under 4, the consultation, is the procedure published under the way that the consultation takes place? So that procedure is contained within the Constitution itself, and is the one you described above, that when we're taking a decision, it has to go through the Chief Executive, relevant chairman, before the decision maker can take the decision. But that's set out actually in the Constitution. Lovely. And as you know, I'm always somewhat confused by the section 12, which is risk management. I'd have thought in here there would be some risks, given that we're taking decisions in a way which is non-standard and we're accelerating them. So I was just surprised there wasn't a risk management section in this report. So I took the view that in this report that there isn't a risk inherent in just this report. Yes, of course, there were risks involved in those decisions, but those should have been captured in the decision papers themselves, relevant to the actual decision when taken, rather than this report, which is really just reporting on the process. So I suppose just having that in there would have helped me, just to say that the risk management was in the papers, in the decisions made. I think you understood understood, and you're right, that has been put in. I've used that phrasing in other reports, so apologies for that. I could use the same wording there. Okay, thank you very much. That's all the comments I've got on that report.
Thank you, Jeff. And I have one question really for you, Nick, is in terms of the process of involving getting the panels underway and getting the work done, where are we in terms of the progress on that? What's happening?
So the panels have resumed on their normal municipal calendar dates, so they are all either having started meeting or will be meeting as per their normal scheduled dates. So there'll be virtual meetings, of course, at the moment, but they've all just picked up their normal meeting dates.
Chairman, can I just say, I know today we've got it says town or parish, none. It is the case that in response to decisions that North Somerset Council took, ad hoc groups sprang up. One in particular in Clevedon, concerning the closure of the Salthouse car park. So I found this very interesting that we've got a emergency governance and decision making arrangements, which obviously have got to be put into place. But I think it is worth noting that there were sort of rumblings and interjections from both parish level and also non-executive member level, as far as some of the decisions were concerned. And indeed, that some of this resulted in changes in the decision-making process. So I'm just wondering if it would be appropriate to make representations to the town and parishes as far as decisions are concerned, because I know that some of us did get representations as local members, basically, along the lines of, well, what are you going to do about it? We're not happy with decisions that have been taken. So I think that needs, at least needs to be noted there. We may not need to do it to the letter of the law, as it were, but I think we do need to take into account that did happen, and it was a good thing that it did, in my view.
Chairman, if I may come back on this report again, the town or parish here saying none. That's because the report, this specific report, doesn't affect any town or parish in particular to any greater or lesser degree than any other. I would agree that again in the decision sheet that would highlight if the decision was specific to affecting just one or small areas of one or two town or parish councils. But by their very nature, these are urgent decisions. They have to be taken wherever possible. Yes, we were consulting not only with the relevant decision maker and the policy and scrutiny panel chair, but with the relevant lead executive member and with ward members. So I think that was going on wherever possible within the remits of the urgency that we were faced with. But again, I think the point is well made that where that wasn't possible and when there was then feedback and local members did get involved, decisions were reviewed and we learnt and took in account further information as it became available. And some of those decisions were evolving as they moved on. So I think that again, I think worked very well. We took the decisions, but where there was further information that could be taken into account and the decisions modified, I think they were. Yeah,
thanks, Nick. I just wonder if that could be noted, because that process did actually take place. As I say, I think we need to make sure that we can refer towns and parishes to stuff that we actually did, not just sticking to the letter of the law, as it were. There you go.
So I think that's useful, and I'm sure the minutes of this meeting can reflect that.
Yeah, good.
And are there any other comments and matters from any of our members?
Chairman, I'm not sure if Councillor Bridger wishes to address the meeting. He's made a comment in chat, but
okay. Yeah, be welcome to.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Didn't really necessarily wanted to say anything other than what I put in the chat, but which was essentially that Philippa Penny is putting together an overall work plan, or first pass at that. It's quite a piece of work, actually. It's got different sort of levels to it, so it's more complex than you might think. So Philippa's working on that, and that will go to the next meeting of the scrutiny chairs and vice chairs, to which you'll be invited, John. And then beyond that, obviously, the next step is to consider collectively where it makes sense to establish some joint panel working groups, particularly around policy development side of things. So that's happening soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, can I just point out that some of us can't see the chat. So if Councillor Bridger, are you happy that you've explained what you have put in the chat, Steve?
I have, Rich. Yeah, exactly what I put in the chat. Yeah, but noted. Thanks.
And Chairman, if I may, to pick up on Councillor Bridger's point there, I think, yes, Philippa is working hard on putting that together. I think picking up on the earlier point from Councillor Richardson, that it may well be useful when we start to look at those agendas in the future that we actually separate. And as he said, I have had this conversation, that almost like with planning, where we have the part one, part two, that we actually divide the agendas between scrutiny items and policy items, so that it's more clear what mode that the committees are in when they're considering any particular item.
Indeed. Yeah, that would be very helpful. Are there any other members' comments, questions, clarification?
No others from the chat, Chairman, and there's just Councillor Hearn, obviously on the telephone, who hasn't spoken as yet.
I've got nothing. Right.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much. So can we move to what's the recommendation is that the audit committee notes.
It's really just that you note the report. I thank you for the observations. I'll feed those back both to the chairs and vice chairs as to the agendas. And the note here will take into account Councillor Westwood's point about the participation of the town and parish councils. So with that, I don't think you need a formal vote on this item, Chairman.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much for that, Nick.
Thanks, Nick.
In that case, we'll move to the next item, which is the COVID-19 risk register. And can invite a presentation on that, please.
Thank you, Chair. So the report is in your papers. It's information only, but effectively the report presents the appendix, which is the COVID-19 corporate risk register for Q1. As part of the Council's response to the pandemic, we've obviously set up emergency structures. Effectively, COVID CLT was meeting 3 times a week, went down to 2 and is now meeting once a week. But they are obviously, there's a whole raft of risks and issues, obviously, that the corporate management team has been dealing with over this period. But what the risk register seeks to do is to collect up the current risk. It's very much a live risk register. It's very broad in what it covers, so it will cover things like finance, provider support, infrastructure and recovery, issues with our own workforce, safeguarding, etc. So it's quite an expansive risk register. I'm happy to take questions on it, but because it is so expansive, some of those I may not have so much detail on. But it is there really to provide the committee with assurance that risks are being captured and monitored and mitigated. And I'm happy to take any questions.
So thank you very much for presenting that to us as well. And I should have said also to you, Nick, for presenting your work to us also. It's important, I think, at this time that we are able to show what is actually happening within the council. So totally appreciate it. So can we move to any questions or observations or clarification or any other point with regard to the risk register, please?
Chairman, Councillor Richardson has indicated he'd like to speak, and just to mention, as you probably noticed, Councillor Leigh Morgan has also now joined the meeting.
Excellent, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Chair. Just one quick comment. We got the corporate management team referred to in this report. I'm guessing we're the CLT now rather than the corporate management team, but not that important.
But you're correct. It is CLT, corporate leadership team. Absolutely right.
Yeah. So as far as the risk register is concerned, that's fine. It's great. We've got a risk register. I would like to see mitigating actions more clearly defined in it. But my real question is about, and I think you just touched a little bit on it there, is how the risk register is maintained, reviewed, and how the mitigating actions are tracked, so that we know that we're actually acting on the risks, and we know that we're actually updating them and keeping track of what success or otherwise we're having with them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I get the question. So CLT meet specifically on COVID response weekly. It's a completely separate meeting to the normal corporate leadership team meeting, and each week they review the risk register, and they will pick on 1 or 2 risks each time to have a deep dive and to be reassured over. So that's effectively how it's moved. I do take your point around sort of commentary on current status isn't quite mitigating actions. I think that is more to do with how fluid things are at the moment, but I accept the point.
Okay, that's fine. If we could ask,
can I come in there?
Chairman?
Jeff, would you mind if I came in there just for a minute?
Sure.
Chairman, I'm experiencing almost complete loss of quality or sound quality there. I didn't make out a word, basically, of what Jeff or Richard said there. Am I the only one?
Good question.
I'm having a few noise issues in the background, but I think I've got some of it.
Fine. It's just breaking up with me, but there you go. I'll persevere.
It's certainly important to know whether you're having difficulty being properly involved in this, Rich.
Well, I can just about make out what you said, John, but it is difficult. I'll persevere. I'll listen carefully. I haven't done anything different. The sound was fine earlier on, and it seems to have just deteriorated badly.
Okay, I'm not sure if anything tech-wise can be done to ramp up the volume on the call. Anyway, Richard Pensker, can I ask the data on this particular register? How out of date is the information on this, or how in date is the information on this?
So this would have been compiled 2 weeks ago, Chair.
Okay, so we're not far out of date in terms of what's going on. And I wonder how often does it get updated, and how often does it get reported to the relevant leads?
So this is reviewed weekly by CLT. So if there's an update appropriate at that time, it will be updated.
And do CLT also report that back or communicate that back to the executive as well?
Well, not specifically as the risk register, but you'll see from the details within it that each one of those items could be reported back to exec as a separate item, because they're all things we are managing. So, for instance, if we picked on the sort of risk number 2 in the papers, which is about council's financial viability, the executive are almost briefed weekly or certainly fortnightly on our moving position over our finances. So I think it will be different for each risk.
Okay, I understand. I mean, I do understand that we're running through an emergency situation, having to respond really fast and rapidly, certainly.
So, Richard, could I just ask you what I was going to ask before, which is, if you had to pick 2 risks out of there, which ones would you highlight?
Richard Westwood
is now exiting.
So that's a really tricky question, actually, because I think it would depend on whether you're looking into the sort of immediate versus the more medium to long term. So and clearly in my role or current role, I'll be worrying about finances, and I think probably for me it would be the ones I'm responsible for, which is around contract management as well, which I think I would put with that provider support or supplier support, and they are linked in so much as we are obviously having to provide some sectors with support. Adult social care and care homes is a really good example, and how sustainable that is. And how affordable that remains for the council across the medium term is a risk. And of course, it relies on the amount of government support we'll get to continue that. But you could merge into that things like home to school transport, support for the leisure sector. It's quite an expansive risk, but it is all linked into the council's financial viability and the ability to which we can assist and support some of our providers against a sort of envelope of affordability for us, making sure that ourselves as an organisation remains financially viable. Having said that, in answer to your question, I'm sure if some of my other colleagues from CLT who asked the same question, they'd probably come up with different risks, but they would be my 2.
Okay, thank you very much. What assumptions are we making about the development of the coronavirus outbreak? Well, because presumably we have assumptions that underlie these risks as well.
Well, so effectively we watch and we are watching infection rates. We are watching a whole set of data. So we have a sort of a data dashboard around the infection rates and health, and clearly we respond accordingly. So, you know, should we face
Richard Westwood
is now joining.
You know, have we got a sort of local outbreak plan? Yes, we have. So we've got all things prepared should things get worse, and of course we've got recovery streams that we'd accelerate should things get better. So it's all predicated on you know, the local and national picture around infection rates and easing of lockdown.
Okay, lovely, thank you.
Anything else from you, Jeff?
No, that's fine. Thanks, John.
Thank you. I do have one question to do with item 13, I believe, on the risk register. And it's to do with people working from home and the workforce. And I'm wondering there, having had one or two conversations with officers, it seems that there are difficulties for some officers in getting decent bandwidth on their internet connections, as we've experienced as the committee today, for example. And also there have been some difficulties in terms of being able to find appropriate workspace while working at home. So, and I'm wondering what actions may or may not be able to be taken in that, as that seems to me to be fundamental in terms of facilitating all the other things that are on this risk register.
Thanks, Chair. So there are a number of work streams around our staff working effectively remotely. So some staff will really struggle because of their own situations. It could be to do with bandwidth, it could be to do with where they live or childcare, etc. And our offices are open if staff are unable to effectively work from home. So our offices have remained open. We will follow government advice, which is you should work from home, but if you're unable to work from home, you should come into the office. And we do have a number of staff that come into the office, may not come into the office every day, but will come into the office if they feel they can't work from home. But what we are looking to do is, of course, is to take the opportunity around the fact that we've gone through a significant change, and many of our staff are working very effectively from home, see it as positive, enjoy flexible working, and are very productive. And we need to make sure that we continue to promote that activity, as well as helping people that are in a different space. So we are planning about how we might move back into the office when government advice changes. And I don't know when that will be, but if we just imagine that might be in sort of September, October time, we are thinking about how we can socially distance, demarc desks and space, one-way systems in offices, etc. So we're going through quite a lot of work to prepare the offices for a semi-return to the workspace in order to help those staff which you've referenced, which may find working from home quite difficult to do.
Thank you, Rich. Are there any other comments or questions from members?
Nothing on the chat function, Chairman, but obviously 2 callers in the meeting still.
Indeed.
Yeah, just anecdotally, Chairman, my wife is a North Somerset Council employee, and she's been working from home since the start of the lockdown, basically. So it's about, must be getting on for 14, 15 weeks now, and that seems to be working well, as it were. She's I don't think there have been any major technical problems, and it's in many ways one is led to begin thinking about possible extension of home working in the future once the COVID-19 emergency is a thing of the past. which hopefully at some point it will be.
Thank you, Rich. I think I think from my own observation, it seems quite reassuring. There was one of the clear upsides is it reduces the amount of travel that people have to do, but I do recognise that it can be a major problem in terms of team morale and understanding how the dynamics of people working together as well. So it seems to have positives and benefits in some ways, and loses them in others.
Negatives in the others, yeah.
But anyway, it's work in progress, clearly. I think all comments have been heard. Is that true from the members of the committee?
Absolutely, John.
Nothing to add.
Nothing else to add? Okay, thank you. In that case, I recommend that we note that we've had this report and appreciate what it contains, and say thank you for bringing it to us.
Thank you, Chair.
Move on to the next one. Thank you very much, Richard. So the next piece of agenda item is the business support grant funding and the anti-fraud work on that. And that's from the head of audit assurance, Peter Can.
Thanks, Chairman. I'm going to attempt to share my screen now. So hopefully, Chairman, you can confirm whether or not this works, please.
Thank you. I can see your screen.
You can see the report okay there?
Not yet, but I can see your screen.
Can you see it now?
Only your file explorer.
Okay, try again. Oh. Try that again. Can you see the screen now, Chairman?
Again, I can't see the report. I can see your screen.
So Pete, all it's showing is your file structure. So it's
yeah, okay. Let me see if I can.
Is it possible that you're sharing a window rather than a screen?
Yeah, it should be showing the whole thing. It doesn't matter. I'll just comment through the report instead, then, Chairman, in that respect, because I appreciate there's some calls on the telephone as well. So I'll
okay, that's fine.
From there, okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So this is in respect of the business support grant funding and the internal audit work to deter, prevent and detect fraud in regards to the business support grant funding. So Section 3 gives background around the funding available. So in response to COVID-19, the government announced that there'd be support for small businesses and businesses in the retail, hospitality and leisure sectors. And then later on, they announced a further local authority discretionary grant fund was going to be made available, and that was to small and micro businesses who are not eligible for the funds previously aforementioned. So Section 4 talks about the conditions, and they're set out in paragraphs 4.1 and 4.2. And just to give some broad context around the funding, as of 14th of June, 10.36 billion had been paid out nationally to over 844,000 business properties. So of that national figure, North Somerset Council had paid out just over 39 million across 3,218 properties. So Section 5 talks about the local authority discretionary fund itself, and the eligibility for the grant scheme is set out in sections 5.1 to 5.4. But what I'd like to highlight here is that in order to provide support to as many businesses as possible, the grants which North Somerset Council awarded were capped at a maximum of £5,000. Again, above that, it explains that you could have provided more than that if required. And it's also worth noting that applications closed on the 8th of June and 576k out of an allocation of 2.1 million were paid out to 216 businesses. Now, obviously, this is well below the level the council was allocated by government, and the scheme was therefore extended, and further applications have been sought from the 29th of June 2020. So it is back open again for other businesses to apply for money from the remainder of that fund. Section 6 talks about managing the risk of funds, and in terms of a national approach, The government was very clear that any attempts to fraudulently obtain grant money will result in prosecution, and any funding will be subject to clawback, as would any grants paid in error. So again, that was around both fraudulent attempts and those that were made in error. There is the ability to reclaim monies. And also worth noting that the government's counter fraud function have made available a digital assurance tool that they got available called Spotlight. Obviously, I'll explain this in detail to members in our informal briefing. But essentially, this tool can help with prepayment and post-payment assurance, and thus help to reduce the risk of fraud. So in terms of work completed at North Somerset Council, internal audit were involved right from the outset, and we assisted the council's corporate accountancy team and our Liberator colleagues with suitable processes and controls for processing the grant claims. And this is also to reduce the risk of erroneous payments and, of course, of fraudulent payments. Central government had issued instructions, however, and this is really important to note, that payments should be made as quickly as possible in order to support those struggling businesses. So it was important, as well as ensuring that there are robust controls in place, to ensure there's a balance between achieving that while still allowing those businesses to be paid in a timely fashion. So this is achieved using the methodology and work is described in paragraph 6.4 to 6.8 in the report. And they really focused around the prepayment processes and controls. So they were the front end controls, if you like, the preventative controls. So now that the majority of payments have been made for the Small Business Grant Fund and Retail Hospitality and Leisure Grant Funds, an internal audit review is now underway. And that's in order to provide retrospective assurance over the validity and accuracy of the payments made. This review will also include some of the discretionary grant fund payments that have been made, so it will cover both of the funds that have been available throughout the scheme. And I just finally, Chairman, wanted to raise the members item 7, which is so in addition to the specific work I've just outlined there in regards to the grant fund payments, we've also completed further audit work around developing and issuing fraud alerts, because there's been several scams and so forth throughout the whole of this COVID-19 situation. We've provided advice and guidance to service areas where we've had changing controls and possible changes to their risk environment. And we've also been keeping involved with the National Heads of Internal Audit's COVID-19 Forum, which basically gives us comfort that the work we're undertaking is in line with those that other heads of audit across the country are undertaking. So really that concludes, Chairman, the update in respect of the COVID-19 anti-fraud work, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Chairman, Councillor Richardson has indicated he'd like to speak.
Thank you very much. Jeff?
Thank you, Chair. Just a few questions on this. Just wanted to ask who is actually paying for the work that's being carried out here, the extra audit work, and indeed are other pieces of work being neglected because of this, and who is responsible for the costs of prosecution. So my view being here that we're acting as an agent for the national government and we shouldn't be out of pocket as a council as a result of what's going on here. I don't know if you can answer that question or anybody else present could.
So in the last couple of days, there has been funding announced for local councils across the country. You probably will have seen that announcement, and in that is in regards to all different elements of COVID-19 work. So there will be an element within that, I would imagine, to cover this particular piece of work. I believe that there's also opportunity to obtain some funding back through the actual grant funding, and I'm not sure if Richard Pence can maybe provide some more information on that. If not, I can take that away and get some more detailed information for you. But broadly, it's around the national funding which has been announced. In terms of the question,
yeah,
see Richard, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I just think, just for context, this was done very quickly. So, you know, as a council, we didn't really get an opportunity to decide whether we were going to do this or not. Obviously, we wanted to distribute this money to local companies, and we wanted to do it securely, and we were promised that it would be funded. Now, that was some months ago, and we have just been notified of the funding. We don't actually know what the allocation is. So, with a fair wind, we hope that the new burdens funding for the administration of the scheme and the work of internal audit is all covered by government funding. but equally to distribute £40 million worth of grant funding to our local businesses would have always been a priority. So, I accept the comments made, but in some respects, let's hope that the new burdens funding covers the cost. But it still would have been something the council would have put resources to, because it was important that we got that money out to local businesses.
Understood, Richard, understood. So a related question is, are we liable financially for any loss due to payments being made in error or payments or in fraud?
So in error, no, if it's genuine error, and possibly not fraud if we've put in significant or followed advice, which we have done, and gone through checks. I think if it could be demonstrated that we hadn't been careful and that we'd made payments without proper checks and we'd made, let's just say, unreasonable errors, then the liability for that would rest with the council. But I don't believe that's the position we're in.
Okay, thank you, Richard. I think that's all I've got to say on this report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Appreciate that. I have one question on this report, which is to do with wondering about where we are at this stage, whether we're in a position where we've identified potential cases that need to be investigated, and if so, how's that process being measured and monitored, and what's the reporting chain?
Thank you, Chairman. So so far there's been 7 instances identified where there needs to be further investigation around the payments paid. They weren't fraudulent attempts. It was just whether or not they were potentially duplicate attempts. However, there is a possibility that due to the criteria of the funding, it may be that originally they were set up as businesses, as limited companies, for example, and now they've gone into a sole trader position. So we are undertaking further work in that regard to understand whether or not that they are eligible for the payments. So to answer the question, yes, 7 identified so far, none fraudulent, but 7 which we need to look into further.
Thank you very much, Pete. Anybody else got any questions? Sandra, Richard, or
just a comment, Chairman. I'm very much encouraged by the very proactive way that this issue of potential fraud is being dealt with, as far as these unusual grants and payments are concerned. I remember we had that briefing from WECA, and the question there was asked, how do you guard against people setting up businesses in order to claim grants? And the answer came back, yeah, that's a good question there. We're thinking about it. Well, I'm glad to see that North Somerset Council is being a little bit more to the point.
Thank you, Councillor Westwood, for those comments. Just to comment on that, actually, one of the tools that we've got, the Spotlight tool, it actually allows us to flag up companies that were active after the 11th of March or active before the 11th of March. So we will be able to see from that particular government tool, which they've kindly given us access to, as to whether or not they were set up for that particular. And you're absolutely right, that's the sort of check which takes place right at the beginning to make sure that they were a valid company before the grants scheme announcement was made. So that will give you some extra comfort that those checks are being undertaken.
Good.
Yeah, very good. And are there any other questions maybe from the members that are here that aren't on the committee?
Not from me, Chair.
Nothing at this stage. Thank you very much. So might we note this report and say thank you very much indeed for bringing it to us, and move on to the next item of business.
Thank you, Chairman. So I will take on to on this report as well. So this is in regard to the Internal Audit Annual Report for 2019-20. Yeah. So just again, I won't try and get this up on the screen, so I will just go through the reports. So this is the closing Internal Audit Report to the Committee for the financial year 2019-20. And this includes a summary of audit performance and any key issues, as well as the Director of Audit's formal opinion on the internal control framework. Just one thing I just want to quickly remind members is that this report covers a period up to 31st of March 2020. So obviously this report is a couple of months old in that regard. So the main area I'd like to highlight to members is on page 2 of this report, or page 27 of your overall pack, which will show you the performance charts and the speed dials within there. And I'm just going to provide a little bit of commentary around those speed dials. So the first one is in regards to item 1, which is completion of the internal audit plan. And as you can see, the performance dashboard shows that at the end of the financial year, 85% of the audit plan was completed. Members will be aware that that's slightly ahead of the figures reported to the audit committee in last year's annual reports, and it also meets the target that we set out in our 6-monthly update report to members. So that's obviously a good position. Section 2 talks about the audit reviews completed in assigned days. So in this regard, 90% of audits reviews were completed within their assigned days. And just for a bit of context, the remaining 10% related to minor overruns. And these are primarily linked to the appointment of new employees, and also the time required for these new employees to familiarise themselves with the council, with the new systems and with the service areas that they were involved with. So we did anticipate a small amount of overrun in that regard, but overall a good score again of 90%. I just also like to point out to members that it remains that across the partnership, obviously some members here will be more aware than others, that it's a partnership between North Somerset Council and Bath and North East Somerset Council. And we take a strategic and operational approach across the partnership. And obviously we try to employ joint working wherever possible to avoid any duplication and to ensure efficiency. And this has been particularly well demonstrated during the recent work we've done around COVID. So, we've had some positive comments earlier in regards to audit work across COVID, and it did help that we've been doing work across Bath and North East Somerset Council as well. So again, we can share efficiency and share ideas and discussions around controls and methods of doing things. So that's been particularly advantageous during this current situation. Section 3 talks about customer service. And just to give a bit of background on this, customer satisfaction is generally sought through talking to lead clients and through our quality assurance questionnaires that we issue at the end of our reviews. You will see that there is a score of 100%, and this is something which I've just discussed with members, and we've had some really good communication about, and something that we've also discussed that we really value getting some feedback from members about. And you will hopefully have seen an email I sent out yesterday outlining how we get the feedback so far, and inviting your consultation in regards to this feedback in future, and how we can ensure that that we develop the best feedback reporting system that we can. I'm aware that 100% is obviously a good score, but one that obviously always brings about an element of suspicion. But obviously we had some positive comments from both yourself, Chairman, and the other members of the Audit Committee during our consultation on Thursday. And we look forward to hearing from you and working with you as to how we can improve that feedback system going forward. So thank you for those comments on Thursday.
Thank you for that, Peter.
If I can just now take you on to section 5, which is in regards to the assurance level provided. So of the audits completed where an assurance rating has been given, 86% of those during the year had an opinion of between satisfactory to excellent. So that's between levels 3 and level 5. So there were no internal audit reports issued this year where it's considered that the systems of internal control were either weak or poor, which are either level 1s or level 2. But as I say, there were 2 where they were at level 2. And the first one of these was in regard to the HR transaction on payroll service. And that's particularly in regards to the HR transaction element of the review, which was considered to be weak. Members will be aware that we discussed this throughout the year. We talked about the work that was being done. And we also talked about the fact that this has now been brought back in-house and is now being dealt with by North Somerset directly, as opposed to with one of its partners. And you'll be encouraged to see that we've actually got a review of this taking place again in the next financial year, just to give you some further assurance that the new arrangements in place are working well. The second is in regard to an area of work called IR35, which is essentially off-payroll working rules. That's quite a complicated law, that one. It's a tax law which is introduced to stop contractors who are working under the same or very similar circumstances to a permanent employee from setting themselves up as companies and basically from taking home more money and paying less tax through the fact that they were set up as a company. Rules changed throughout the last few years, and in April this became the responsibility of the local authority to ensure that it was all being dealt with correctly. So from the work we completed an audit, we concluded that there was a few areas which needed improvement, and they were broadly around overarching responsibility for IR35 off payroll working, ensuring that there was one central point which monitored whether a post is an office holder or an invoice employee, and therefore the costs that they attract, and also to ensure that we were reviewing agency staff roles after the period of 6 months. I mean, really, that was from a value for money perspective, in order to ensure that that we weren't just continuing to pay agency staff when we might otherwise look to employ full-time members of staff, potentially at a cheaper rate. Our conversations in that regard remain ongoing with the service lead, is the head of HR there, and the recommendations made in the report will be followed up as per our agreed timescales, and we're continuing to have the discussions with that service lead up until the end of this week. If I can just take you all on to section 6, please, which is in regard to investigations and whistleblowing. So essentially, we undertook 2 new investigations during the last financial year. The first one was in regard to home to school transport provision. It's worth noting that there were various issues that existed in that area, and they were broadly related to service delivery and professional conduct of the firm operating this home to school transport provision. Obviously, most of the areas were addressed by colleagues across the council, but as part of the work that we did with internal audits, we were asked to complete an analysis of some of the invoices and associated financial data from the taxi company concerns. So we undertook that work, and obviously that work and the detailed conclusions are obviously confidential, but I can provide assurance that the summary finding was that any variation in regards to the invoices that we looked at was of a negligible amount. And it was considered that it was due to error rather than anything untoward. So when I say negligible, I'm talking a few pounds, but it really wasn't anything significant whatsoever. However, in order to provide further assurance to the committee, we have got further work plans in that service area in the next financial year, again, to give you that ongoing assurance. The second investigation related to a whistleblowing allegation which we received, and that was of alleged fraudulent practice. So again, in that instance, the allegation was not proven, but we are continuing to work with the relevant service manager in that area to ensure that robust controls remain in place, and also to deter and also to detect any misconduct. I'd also like to highlight to members that there was a revision and update of the of areas of fraud prevention strategy and policy during the year, which should all be remembered from our meeting in January. That's included the anti-fraud and corruption strategy, the whistleblowing policy, the anti-bribery and corruption policy, and the anti-money laundering policy and guidance. And hopefully members will also recall the training which was provided to them back in February time, which was some fraud awareness training. And as we discussed, and as feedback from the audit committee was gratefully received, our intention is for 2021 to roll that out to all councillors, as well as undertaking staff training sessions. Again, as I highlighted on Thursday, those staff training sessions have already started to take place, and then we'll be developing that, as I say, and rolling that out further as the year progresses.
On a personal level, I just need to say I do appreciate that training. It's very good, excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So in regards to unplanned work, just a couple of areas I'd like to highlight in regards to unplanned work that took place in the last year. One was around blue badges, and again, I know that the committee were heavily involved in conversations around that, and we received some really good input from the committee in that regard. That was primarily fraud prevention work, and that was around the extension to the scheme to cover the new Hidden Disabilities Act, which had come in. There was also some risk management work, which was essentially around refreshing the corporate risk register based around the new corporate plan. And also there was work around coronavirus, as was previously reported. So finally, if I can just take you on to section 9, which is the formal opinion on the internal audit control framework. So as part of our statutory requirements, the Chief Audit Executive, Jeff Bring, is required to give an opinion over the overall internal control framework, and he needs to consider the work completed by Audit throughout the year, as well as other assurances that we can draw upon in respect of the wider governance framework across the council. So it is his opinion that at the current time the council's internal control framework and systems to manage risk are reasonable, and that there are no fundamental system failures or control breakdowns to business critical functions. However, it is important to state that we will remain alert to some of the improvements needed in areas such as contract management, and more importantly and more significantly, the recent pandemic outbreak, which will obviously have a significant impact upon the council's operations during the next financial year, during 2021. So really, Chairman, I would just like to conclude at that point, and I'm happy to take any questions in regards to the reports. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. So any questions, observations from any members?
Chairman, just to let you know that Councillor Bridger has now left the meeting, and I've had a request from Councillor Richardson to speak on this item.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Jeff?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a few questions. I could start from the IR35. What the size of this risk is, what the size of the problem is here, in terms of how many employees we've got in this category and the total financial risk?
I can't comment on the current number of employees we've got under this at the moment. As a general rule, the council employs very few of those. In fact, it tries actively not to. In terms of financial risk, it depends on the number of employees involved and obviously the scale of the salary which they were being paid. I'm not aware of any significant amounts in this regard being paid at the moment. Councillor Richardson.
Okay, thank you.
Can I pause you there for a second, please? Just a moment. I've got a similar question related to the IR35. I just wanted to know, how did the situation come about that it wasn't being handled properly in the first place? And are there any lessons to be learned to be applied elsewhere?
So really, it attracted quite a lot of media coverage. So you may be aware of such people in the industry, such as Eamon Holmes would be a good example, who's had a big ongoing battle in regard to whether or not he was an employee of ITV, I think it was. There was a lot of national coverage around that, and other people. As I say, in 2017, the risk got transferred across to for local authorities to local authority to deal with and to manage. So it was obviously a high profile area, which the council could become liable for, and they could be liable for a fine from the HMRC if it wasn't dealt with properly. So we needed to give assurance over that area and just ensure that we were employing ensuring that we were employing employees correctly and under the correct scheme. As I said before, I think the biggest area was around the monitoring of that and the ownership of that, which we highlighted throughout the reports. The comments and the findings that we made were well observed by our human resources team. They accepted that. I think the approach that they'd taken beforehand was for individual managers to be responsible for the employment and to ensure that the employees had gone through the correct checks and the correct scheme to ensure whether or not they were IR35 accountable or not. I think they've acknowledged that whilst that is the right way to do it, there does also need to be an overall monitoring on a wider level from HR. So they have put in place mechanisms now to ensure that is monitored on a regular basis, and I believe a monthly basis, to provide assurance that if any of it was to slip through the gaps, that there would be that kind of safety net, if you like.
Thank you, Pete. Sorry, Jeff, you had some more questions, I know.
Just a quick question about the whistleblowing numbers, Pete, which are either very good or not so.
Yeah.
The fact that we've only got 2 whistleblowing incidents in a year strikes me as being very low, and I'm wondering what we're doing to correct the situation.
So So as I previously mentioned, we did review the whistleblowing policy in the previous year, along with our anti-fraud and corruption strategy as a whole. We are doing a lot of targeted work in fraud this year. We're putting a significant amount of resource into that. Hopefully, some of the members and officers here today will have noticed that, because there's been a lot of communication in that regard. Specifically in regards to whistleblowing, Councillor Richardson, we are currently working with North Somerset Council's internet team, the team responsible for producing the internet. They're currently reviewing the internet at the moment, and we've asked that we can refresh our payment pages on there in order to ensure that it really is as public friendly as it can be in terms of raising any whistleblowing concerns. We feel it's okay at the moment, but it could be improved, and I think you're right to state that, you know, the fact that we've only had 2 whistleblowing referrals does lead to that. So we really want to ensure that that is as easy for the public to be able to communicate to us any concerns they've got as much as they can. So you're absolutely right to acknowledge that, and I can give you assurance that we are providing work in that area. And I will, of course, be happy to give you an update later on in the year as to how that looks, and perhaps we can have a session around, you know, our internet pages and talk you through those and how referrals are made and how they're dealt with.
Okay, thanks. Is the chief exec? Have you talked to the chief exec about this and found out what she thinks about those numbers in particular?
Well, the chief exec is informed through the statutory officers group meetings, which we provide an internal audit performance paper to. That happens bi-monthly, so she is broadly aware from there. I haven't had any direct discussions in regards to figures. She hasn't come towards me about that. Obviously, that's something I can look into and possibly raise with her, and of course get her input into.
Well, that's obviously something that we could raise, John, perhaps as the audit committee are concerned in that area.
Yeah, certainly.
Can I carry on, or does anybody else want to come in? No? Okay. On the unplanned work, in terms of blue badges,
yes.
What's the size of the fraud here? And again, I'm thinking financially, really. And is it against the council as such?
Yeah, so I can't remember the current figures off the top of my head. You'll have to forgive me. I can get those figures for you, Councillor Richardson, and I'm happy to do that, because there was a session last year which I attended. I can't remember. You may have actually, Councillor Richardson, yeah, and Councillor Hearn as well, I believe, attended as well. So those figures in terms of both the national and the local scale were given in there. They are in the millions. So in terms of the fraud prevention work, that was important for us, because we were aware at that point that obviously with the new hidden disabilities allowance coming in for the blue badges, that would obviously attract a lot of potential referrals in regards to people believing that blue badges were being used fraudulently because people were perceived not to have a disability. You know, for example, if someone gets out of the car and they're on crutches, you know, and have got a blue badge, then that becomes quite apparent. However, if they've got some sort of mental health issue, then that's not obviously visible. So we included that last year as a piece of fraud prevention work, and you'll also be interested to know that we've included it this year as a part of a wider piece of work as well, because we identified that there were opportunities for improvement around the blue badge process in general, and we felt there'd be real benefit in actually including a full review of the process across the wider council as part of the 2021 plan. So we've included that as well.
Okay, lovely.
Thank you.
Just one more thing on the section 7.3 risk management. You've got a section there, further work included, briefing and updates to members, including the committee on this work, and as discussed, right, this isn't actually what I meant really. So I still have a problem with the risk sections which are presented to members and on which they make decisions, because they're often, they're very variable, and they're often not complete. And I feel we should be doing some work in there. I think you've actually included something in your plan for next year, but I just wanted to raise that as part of this discussion.
Yeah, we have included that as part of our planned work for next year, Councillor Richardson. So we are going to look at that. I acknowledge that. I acknowledge that you've raised it earlier on in this actual meeting itself earlier on today. So we will be doing some work in that area. I'm quite happy to have some discussions with both yourself and the chairman, of course, in regards to that work. And it might be worth us having a chat around how that can be best placed and talk about your particular concerns in detail. I know you have voiced them before, but it might be good again just to go over those and to ensure that our internal audit work covers those in full and provides you with the assurance that you require in terms of that section being completed correctly in future. And of being of detail and of being of real use to councillors. So I understand that and happy to have those conversations with you before we undertake that work.
Okay, lovely, thank you.
Thank you.
That's all I've got. John.
Thank you very much, Jeff, and thanks for that, Pete. It's good to hear that.
Thank you.
So, what else might we have here? Can I ask a question on the section 9, I believe it is, about this reasonable assurance? Am I right in assuming that reasonable assurance is the same reasonable assurance as referenced in Appendix A of this report?
Yeah, if I'm able to answer that question.
Excellent, thank you.
Hi. Yeah, so the term is the same, but the individual definitions for coming to those opinions are slightly different. So this opinion is a judgment that I have to give publicly in terms of the whole internal control framework. The reference that you see, and there are some bullet points there which describe some of the ways in which I come to that opinion.
Yeah.
And clearly, there's as much as there is objective information, there's quite a lot of subjective judgment in that. In terms of the reasonable assurance opinion or the reasonable assurance model, which I think you're referring to, that is over not exactly the same environment. So that's looking at things from a pure risk and assurance perspective in terms of our planning, and that gives us a judgment in terms of the priorities in our internal control environment. So it's just that we try to use the common language as much as possible to ensure that key stakeholders try to understand as best as possible the kind of thinking that we go through.
So what would be our takeaway as members? I mean, not only us in the audit committee, but as members from that.
Sorry, you're what? Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
What is our takeaway from that reasonable assurance statement there that we should take as members?
Well, I think in terms of this particular report, I think, as I said, I'm required to give that opinion in public. The external auditor takes a view about that opinion in terms of the way it also views its judgments and its risk statements. From an audit committee perspective, it's effectively a summary. It's the very high level opinion I'm giving on all the internal audit work carried out through the year and all the other assurances that we would rely on in terms of forming an opinion. So basically what I'm saying is things are reasonable, and I've listed the reasons why I think they are reasonable. If things were poor, I will give a limited assurance view, and if that was the case, then the audit committee would need to carry out further work in terms of its particular remit to ensure that we were looking at how we could improve that internal control framework, but that's not the case. So if you get a reasonable assurance opinion, you can't get a higher opinion. If you get a reasonable assurance opinion, then you should take that assurance as part of satisfaction in terms of your terms of reference, that you've taken that from the internal auditor's work.
Okay, thank you for that, Jeff. Are there any other questions or comments of clarification or otherwise?
Nothing further from the chat, Chairman.
Nothing further. Okay, thank you. So can we accept we noted that report? And thank you very much indeed. And now I believe we have the next report as well from, is it from Pete again?
Yeah, I'll take this one again, Chairman. Thank you very much. So this is item 10. So there is a recommendation around this one, and that is that the Audit Committee approves the Audit and Assurance Plan for 2021. So just to give you a bit of background on this, and I don't propose to go through this in too much detail because obviously we discussed this in quite a bit of detail prior to today. This report outlines the annual Audit and Assurance Plan, which forms the main part of our work for the Internal Audit Service for 2021. Also attached in these papers as well is the Audit Charter for the Internal Audit Service. And just to make members aware, there's very, very minor revisions there, really just for things like job titles and so on. And that's really just provided for information in Appendix B. So in regards to the plan, the main thing I really want to raise there is in terms of developing the plan, members will already be aware from the discussions we've had throughout the year that it's gone through extensive consultation. That was between December and March this year that consultation took place. That included discussion with senior management, director management teams, statutory officers, and with yourselves, the Audit Committee as well. And you'll see that the comments that you've made throughout the year have been fed into the audit plan. A good example of that is the one which Councillor Richardson raised earlier around risk management. So took that all on board, noted all of those comments that were made, and we've included those within our plan. However, one thing I do want to underline, please, Chairman, is that the plan was compiled prior to the COVID-19 lockdown. Therefore, whilst we have got a section in there, and of course there will be time in there for COVID-19 related work, it will have to be continuously reviewed because obviously the impacts of COVID-19 on the council and its service area will become clearer over the coming months. So really the key message I want to give in regards to the plan is that it will need to be flexible to react to these emerging risks. And I think that's just important for you all to note and to be aware of in regards to the fluidity of the plan this year, given the unprecedented circumstances which have arisen. So really, Chairman, I don't propose to go into any more detail at this point, but I'm happy to take any questions around it.
Thank you very much, Pete. Appreciate that very much. Any questions, comments from anybody?
Yes, Chairman, Councillor Richardson has asked to speak.
Thank you.
Sorry, John. Just a few things, Pete. First of all, compliment the scope of services under Section 2. I love that graphic. It just shows up our spend between the various areas. I think that would be really useful for the public to see.
Thank you.
It emphasises where the spending goes, and I think it does very clearly, which I think is great.
Yeah, I agree completely.
Thank you.
So a few other things. One is you've got the charter. How does the charter differ from terms of reference? Because I notice you mentioned both in the paper.
Sorry, am I able to answer that, Chair?
Yes, certainly. Thank you.
Sorry. So, in terms of the charter, that sets out the role, responsibilities, and independence of internal audit. The terms of reference you refer to is to do with the Audit Committee's role. So, obviously, that is something different.
Oh, okay, fine. Thank you. Yep. And I noticed that in here we're actually talking about an external assessment of the internal audit, and I just wanted to know what the timetable is for that, and when we had the last one, and when the next one's due.
The public sector internal audit standards, Councillor Richardson.
I'm not sure I mean that. I think there's a review, I think every 5 years, is it? And I was just wondering when it.
That's right.
Yeah, the last one took place in 2018. I think it was Jeffrey Redicker, I'm sure it's 2018.
So we're required to abide by the professional standards of our Chartered Institute, and the external auditor check that we do that as well. And a requirement is that at least once every 5 years we must be externally assessed. The last assessment was in 2018. and so our next assessment will be in 2 or 3 years' time. We can bring it forward if we need, but we anticipate it will be within this current audit committee's term as such, and you will be involved in that process as well.
Okay, lovely. Under 11.3, we've got a statement: as part of its drive to secure efficiencies, internal audit will use all sources of assurance available to it to inform its opinion. I just wondered what that encompasses.
Sorry, could you repeat that, please, Councillor Richardson? I'm not sure if anyone else is having issues, but I can't quite hear you.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Section 11.
Going again.
As part of its drive to secure efficiencies, internal audit will use all sources of assurance available to it to inform. That's section 11.3. I just wondered what that actually meant.
Yeah, so in terms of that just means that whether it's the external auditor or inspectorates or our second line of defence, so health and safety or risk management or any kind of QA process that kind of takes place, we'll look at all the different assurances that we believe that we can rely on. And the key to that is ensuring that we don't duplicate resource and that we remain efficient, and also ensure that our work is as targeted as possible.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. That's all I've got, John.
Okay, and please bear with me. I do have a question somewhere. Please bear with me. Oh yes, on the work plan, Jeff and Pete. I'm minded that we now have the Housing Infrastructure Fund, I think it is, the HIF, which is going through but not on disc, and I'm thinking that same level of risk as the Metro West project, and I'm wondering where that's planned in and how one's including that or not at the moment in terms of we should have on it.
We did discuss that with the with the service area with the director of development environment, chairman. At the time, the award for the funding hadn't gone through yet. Right. It was decided at that point not to include it. Didn't want to be seen as kind of jumping the gun in that regard. I am having ongoing conversations with the director in that area. In fact, I spoke to her last Wednesday, I believe it was, in terms of monitoring that area and whether or not it needs inclusion later on in the year in terms of overall review. But at the time of putting the plan together, it was agreed that it wouldn't be right to put it in the plan at that time.
I understand that. Just observing it and noting it, I think it's an area that needs to be managed incredibly well, or there'll be incredible risks that we're going to be exposed to. So yeah, really keen that internal audit is kind of on it.
Agreed.
Can I make a suggestion, Chair?
Please do, yes.
Yeah. So I think your point is a valid one, and the HIF project is certainly of a scale which is akin to Metro West, but there are a number of things in the plan which, whether they're contract management, whether they're procurement related, actually, as long as internal audit covered the HIF project in those audits, would probably give you the coverage you're seeking without necessarily changing the plan. So clearly, it's up to the committee, and you can make those changes. But I do think some of those elements could be focused, because right now, actually, the HIF project is much more around procurement than it is around than delivery. So some sort of focus in the procurement related reviews would probably give you the coverage you're after.
Thank you, Richard. That was my main question really about that, Peter.
Thank you, Chairman.
Anybody else have any questions, observations? Sandra, Richard?
None from me, Chairman.
None from me.
Thank you, Sandra. So you need to ask there to approve the audit and assurance plan 2020 to 2021. Can I propose that we do? Look for a seconder.
A second.
Thank you. Are we all agreed with that?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you very much indeed. So item 11 then is urgent business permitted by the Local Government Act. Are there any? I'm not aware of any myself. Anybody else got anything to say there?
Chairman, it's Nick Brain. No, there are none.
Thank you very much, Nick. Appreciate that. So there being no further business, I declare the meeting closed. And I must say thank you very much to all the officers for your very, very good work. I have to say that everybody's been, my observation is that everybody has done very, very good work and appreciate it very much. Thank you.